Hello and welcome to a Squirrel Plays. It's me, the Squirrel, and holy shit, guys, I actually have one whole subscriber now. It figures because the first video I make, poking fun at my imaginary audience, somebody decides to go and subscribe, so now I can't make that joke anymore. No idea why that video got so much attention, and the one that got posted immediately after it didn't get anything, but hey, really, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, and it doesn't make much of a difference because YouTube is going to do how YouTube does, and I just have to keep pushing forward. And on that note, that is exactly what we'll do, but I did want to take a second and say that your sub really made my morning, and so did this beautiful comment here. What an absolute legend. So what's on the table for today? Today is another D&D mod, and this one will drastically speed up your combat because, well, let's face it, combat is beyond slow in this game. It is excruciatingly slow. And it's not just me that thinks that either. YouTube is full of videos of people giving their 2 cents on how to speed up combat for D&D, and now you get to see how a squirrel does it. I'm going to call this one ROD, which stands for Rounded Outgoing Damage. In short, all the damage players do to the enemies is rounded either up or down, depending on the accuracy of their hit. This gets us 3 things. 1, more damage per hit. 2, hits happen more often. 3, the math is easier. And who doesn't like easier math, right? Honestly, this mod comes from a trick I've seen passed around from more than a few YouTubers. They'll round up the damage the players do so they can mentally do the numbers quicker. However, that's for physical tabletop games. Some of you might be thinking if you're playing on a virtual tabletop, then it really doesn't matter, right? It's just as easy to remove 7 points of damage from something as it is 5 or 10. And technically, you are right, but as a guy that GMs using virtual tabletops, I promise you this still speeds things up and makes your life easier. But how does it make hits happen more often? Well, it does that by adding in this little feature called close enough hits. By that, I mean if a player rolls their attack close enough to the enemy's AC, then it still counts as a hit, just for not as much damage. This allows the players to land more hits at a reduced damage output instead of just missing completely. And if you're wondering what the range for close enough is, well, that's entirely up to you, Mr. GM. You're the one that gets to decide that. You can make a flat rule if you want, where anything 3 points below the AC is a close enough hit, or you can change it up depending on the enemy at hand. A dragon might not have that range at all, or maybe it'll just have 1 point below its AC. While on the other hand, the players might be able to hit goblins at a whole 8 points from their AC level. It's totally up to you. Now let's talk about how the rounding actually works. First off, your enemy needs to have an HP value that is an increment of 5. Then your player needs to roll their attack, assuming the attack hits. Whatever damage the player deals will be rounded up to the nearest increment of 5. That means if a player rolled 11 damage, they actually did 15 points of damage. If the player rolled 3 points of damage, then the enemy received 5 points of damage. If they rolled for 17, then it'd be 20, and so forth and so on. For critical hits, you would round each roll up to the nearest increment of 5, then add them together. Now take note, if your damage lands on an increment of 5, then it stays on that increment. I only want to point that out because I have seen some people struggle with that. They think if it lands on an increment of 5, you still round up to the next one. But no, it stays where it's at. So that's easy enough, right? Players get to do a little extra damage and the math is a lot easier. For example, if somebody is doing something small that only rolls a d4 for damage, then it's automatically 5 every time. It's small damage, but it is consistent. Now, obviously, when you're doing this, you will probably want to inflate your enemy HP pools a little bit to make up for it, but not too much, else you'll just undo what you're trying to work towards. But what about close enough hits? Now, how do those work? Well, those get rounded down and cut in half. That means if you roll to attack and you don't quite meet the enemy's AC, but get close enough, then your damage is rounded down to the nearest 10 and divided by 2. It sounds like a lot of math, but it's really simple. So if you roll 23 points of damage, but only hit close enough, then you would round down to the nearest 10, which in this case would be 20, then cut it in half, which would be 10. Yes, you did lose 13 whole points of damage, but you're still doing 10 points of damage that you otherwise wouldn't have done. This way things are still happening, and that's why I wanted you to inflate the enemy HP pools a little bit, because you're going to be hitting so much more often. Players are going to be getting to do things more often instead of completely whiffing, but your combat's still going to be faster. If you roll for 18 points of damage, you round down to the nearest 10, which is 10, then cut in half, which is 5. Now what happens if you're below 10? Well, anything between 6 to 10 will do 5 points of damage, and anything 5 or below will do 0. That means small hitting things like daggers and whatnot won't get the benefit of close enough hits, which, makes sense in my opinion. And this is why I wanted you to inflate your enemy HP pools a little bit, because you're going to be doing more damage and hitting more often. Now, you don't want to inflate them too much because you're just going to lengthen your combat, which is what we're trying to shorten. But you need to inflate it a little bit because the players are constantly going to be doing damage, and we want them to be doing damage all the time because that feels a lot better than whiffing your attacks. Also, if you're keeping up with the math, then you probably realize, now, wait a minute. If I do any damage between 6 and 20, then my damage is only going to be 5. And if that was your train of thought, well, congratulations, you are right. Remember, that's 5 damage you normally wouldn't have gotten to do. It's bonus damage. But also, this is an opportune time for you as the GM to narrate. When these close enough hits occur, you can make something happen with the enemy. Their armor can get dented, or it can get broken, or if they're wearing a bunch of leathers and whatnot, they can get torn. Their swords can shatter, maces can break, they can get knocked prone, or they can get stunned. I mean, it's entirely up to you what you want to do. You got plenty of options. And I'll give you an example. A few sessions ago, the barbarian in my group was swinging his axe and rolled for a pretty hefty amount of damage. Problem was, he was a couple points shy of hitting the goblin's AC. And since we were using this little mod of mine, he didn't completely whiff the attack, he actually got to do something. So the game went a little something like this. He rolled his attack and his damage, and then I said, as you come down with your axe, the goblin holds his sword up and tries to take a step back. Your axe shatters the goblin's sword, and it continues on down, and it just barely cuts through the goblin's armor. And then boom, he got to do 5 points of damage. Not a lot, but what happened was the goblin's sword broke, which means he would have gotten to roll all of his attacks with disadvantage, plus I dropped his AC a few more points. Now, I say would have rolled his attacks with disadvantage, but he didn't get to live long enough to make it to his next turn, so it really didn't matter. Now, there's one other thing I need to mention about close enough hits, and then we'll go about our separate ways. When dealing damage this way, you do not trigger any additional damage effects. So, for example, if you had Hex on the enemy and only hit close enough, you would do only the reduced damage from your weapon. You wouldn't get the Hex damage. And what's that other one I think clerics get? It's something like Divine Strikes, I think, just off the top of my head. It adds a little extra damage to their weapon attacks. See, things like that wouldn't work. So no extra damage, just your base weapon. And that's it, ladies and gents. It's a pretty simple mod, but I'm telling you, it doesn't just make things faster. Because let's face it, faster doesn't automatically make something good. The mod makes things faster by smoothing things out, or at least that's been my experience with using it. Now, I'm only one squirrel, I'm just one little rodent, so there's only so much testing I can do, but it has worked for me. And part of that is because I find it incredibly boring when either a player or an enemy whiffs an attack. Now, I'm being dead serious when I've seen a party of 5 fight a group of enemies and everybody whiffed their attacks for 3 whole turn orders. To me, that is completely boring and just downright stupid. Completely avoiding an attack due to a miss should be a rare thing. With 5e set up the way it is, it happens entirely too often, in my opinion. And on that note, I do actually have a mod coming up in the next video that deals with that issue a little bit on the player's side. It makes the type of armor you wear actually matter and adds in some extra effects, but it pairs really well with this mod I just showed you, which is why I wanted to show it to you first. But that is for another video. We're still talking about rounded outgoing damage here, or at least I did, but now it's your turn. Tell me why you don't think this would work at your table, what you would change, or why you would never consider using it.